German generals laughed at U.S. logistics tells the story of the collision between arrogance and hidden strength. The story of how German commanders underestimated what turned out to be a decisive factor in the Allied victory. At the beginning of the war, German generals, emboldened by lightning-fast successes across Europe, laughed at the United States. They saw bureaucratic machines, massive depots, multi-volume manuals, reports, and regulations, and believed that it could never be transformed into an effective military force. The American army seemed cumbersome and slow, incapable of rapid action. At first glance, U.S. logistics appeared to be a weak link, easily broken with minimal effort. However, reality proved otherwise. Beneath layers of paperwork and bureaucracy lay incredible organization. Every warehouse, every transport route, every convoy was part of a massive mechanism capable of supplying troops with everything they needed thousands of miles from home. This system was designed so that any potential mistake would be resolved before it could become critical. The first signs of this hidden power were evident in the deserts of North Africa, where American troops moved across arid expanses, facing blazing sun, sandstorms, and impassable roads. Despite the harsh conditions, soldiers received ammunition, food, water, and fuel on time. German observers were initially amazed, then gradually began to realize that their mockery had been premature. Their confidence in the weakness of the American army crumbled before their eyes. The story unfolds through personal narratives. A young truck driver transports ammunition across mountain roads in Italy from dawn till dusk, risking his life while facing treacherous terrain and enemy attacks. A staff officer coordinates convoy movements at night, checking maps, radio messages, and telegrams to ensure no soldier is left without supplies or ammunition. And there is a German general observing the operations, trying to understand why his calculations are failing. He sees the Americans always one step ahead, as if an invisible hand supports every battle, every maneuver, every front. U.S. logistics also proved critical in the Pacific theater, where oceans, islands, and jungles created unimaginable challenges. Convoys crossed oceans under threat from Japanese aircraft and submarines. Yet warehouses and ports operated without pause. Troops received everything they needed, often unaware that their success depended entirely on this invisible supply mechanism. German observers, and not only them, began to understand that the American strength lay not only in numbers or firepower, but in the unseen supply system that enabled operations hundreds or thousands of miles from home. Stories of individuals make the picture especially vivid. Drivers of convoys spent days and nights on frontline roads, risking their lives under artillery fire and air raids, knowing that any delay could cost hundreds of soldiers' lives. Staff officers worked late into the night, monitoring routes and coordinating shipments to prevent potential problems from becoming critical. On the other side, German generals watched in disbelief as American forces stayed consistently supplied, undermining their carefully planned strategies. As the war progressed, German generals began to realize the magnitude of their error in underestimating American logistics. Their attention focused on Normandy, where the Allied landing was being prepared. To the Wehrmacht, the Normandy invasion seemed nearly impossible. Massive forces, supplies of food, ammunition, and equipment, all had to be transported across the Atlantic under the threat of German air attacks and submarines. American commanders knew that the success of the operation depended on every detail of supply. Every ship, every escort vessel, every batch of ammunition was calculated down to the millimeter. Convoys moved in columns, protected by naval aviation, navigating around submarines and minefields. German generals initially laughed at the complexity of the American system, doubting it could function without error. But when D-Day arrived, it became clear that mistakes were minimal. Ammunition reached the front lines on time, engineering units quickly repaired damaged piers, and naval and air forces ensured continuous supply. On the front lines, soldiers felt the invisible power of this system. One American officer recalled how exhausted units suddenly received fresh provisions, fuel, and new weapons when it seemed all hope was lost. In Africa, in the deserts of Tunisia and Libya, the same pattern emerged. Every supply convoy traversed miles of sandy roads under constant threat, delivering exactly what was needed on schedule. German commanders, who had once mocked the bureaucratic machine, gradually understood that Americans waged war differently. Their army did not rely on immediate tactical victories. It relied on a system that made any obstacle manageable. In the Pacific theater, logistics were even more critical. Island campaigns demanded precise timing. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies had to reach remote islands to keep troops alive. Convoys crossed oceans under threat of Japanese attacks, yet warehouses and transport networks never stopped. Soldiers fought in harsh jungles and mountains, exhausted by battles and travel, yet supplies always arrived on time. Drivers braved storms and enemy fire, understanding that any delay could cost lives. Discipline and precision ensured success. Personal stories make the scale tangible. A young staff officer in Italy spent hours planning ammunition deliveries for mountain units, knowing that success depended on it. A frontline soldier received essential provisions and weapons at the precise moment they were needed. Convoy drivers in the Pacific navigated storms and enemy attacks to deliver vital supplies. These invisible heroes of logistics shaped the outcome of every battle. On a strategic level, U.S. logistics adapted to any unexpected challenge. Disruptions and damage were compensated with reserves. New convoys arrived on schedule. Warehouses were replenished, and transport routes adjusted in real time. German and Japanese commanders realized that traditional methods of pressuring an opponent were ineffective. Any attempt to disrupt American supply lines failed because the system was flexible, massive, and extraordinarily reliable. Meanwhile, American industrial power played a crucial role. Factories that once produced civilian goods were repurposed to produce weapons, vehicles, and ammunition on an enormous scale, redistributing resources between theaters. This ability to supply forces rapidly and accurately made the American army virtually invulnerable at the strategic level. German generals witnessed their every attempt to slow the enemy fail. American forces always had the resources they needed, even in the most remote and difficult locations. The final episodes of this chapter reveal the culmination of German realization. Their laughter at American logistics had turned into strategic defeat. The bureaucratic system they had mocked became a decisive force, enabling the U.S. to win wars not only on the battlefield, but on the strategic level. U.S. logistics emerged as a silent hero, turning chaos into an organized mechanism that made victory possible. As the war continued, it became clear that American logistics was not just a network of warehouses, convoys, and railroads, but an invisible force shaping the outcome of every operation. In Europe and the Pacific, it was evident everywhere, from the coordination of massive landings to the delivery of food to soldiers on the front lines. On the beaches of Normandy, when the first waves stormed fortified positions, supply depots behind the lines were already preparing new shipments of ammunition and provisions. Every unit receiving timely deliveries became part of a vast mechanism of victory. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, every minute of supply was vital. Soldiers fought under scorching sun, in jungles and mountainous terrain, exhausted by travel and combat. Yet timely deliveries provided weapons, medical supplies, and food. Convoy drivers risked their lives navigating narrow mountain roads, bridges, and minefields, knowing that any delay could cost hundreds of lives. Each day was fraught with tension, but the discipline and precision of the supply system ensured success. German generals, observing these processes, gradually came to a terrible realization. The army they once considered inefficient operated with precision and speed they could hardly imagine. Their initial laughter gave way to concern and despair. Diaries and reports began to reflect the realization that underestimating enemy logistics had been one of the main reasons for their defeats. The Blitzkrieg, which had worked in Europe against less prepared nations, now confronted an army capable of operating thousands of miles from home, winning time and space through flawless supply. Individual stories bring this to life. A young staff officer in Italy spent long hours planning ammunition deliveries for mountain units, aware that operational success depended on it. A soldier on the front line received supplies and ammunition at the exact moment his unit needed it. Convoy drivers in the Pacific braved storms and enemy attacks to deliver vital resources to remote islands. These unseen logistics heroes shaped the outcome of every battle. At a strategic level, American logistics demonstrated an unparalleled adaptability. Disruptions and damage were mitigated with reserves. New convoys arrived on time. Warehouses were replenished, and transport routes were adjusted in real time. German and Japanese commanders realized that traditional pressure tactics were ineffective. Any attempt to disrupt U.S. supply lines failed because the system was flexible, massive, and extraordinarily reliable. American industrial capacity reinforced the system. Factories produced weapons, vehicles, and ammunition in enormous quantities, ensuring a steady flow of supplies to all theaters. This capability allowed U.S. forces to operate at a scale previously unimaginable. German generals witnessed every attempt to slow the Americans fail. Their forces always had what they needed, even in the most remote and hostile environments. The final scenes of the story underscored the key realization of German commanders. Their mockery of American logistics had turned into a fatal error. The bureaucratic system they once ridiculed proved to be the decisive factor enabling victory in both Europe and the Pacific. U.S. logistics emerged as a silent hero, supporting operations everywhere and allowing forces to act on scales the enemy had deemed impossible. Through the lens of supply and organization, the story illustrates that war is not only about the front lines and weapons, but also about the unseen mechanisms that make victory possible. Warehouses, factories, railroads, convoys, and the individuals involved formed the backbone of success. German generals' laughter became a symbol of a mistake that could not be undone. Underestimating the systemic power and discipline of an opponent cost them the war. The lesson is clear. Strategic strength often lies in invisible mechanisms rather than in sheer numbers or firepower. American logistics became a decisive ally, a silent hero that made Allied victories possible, proving that the ability to organize, adapt, and deliver resources is as crucial as courage and combat prowess. This hidden yet formidable system forever changed the course of World War II.